Does anyone remember watching Snow White for the first time? Anyone? Do you remember how many men lived in the forest home? Can anyone remember how many, like, what their different names were? Okay, so you have Doc, Sneezy, Grumpy, Happy, Bashful, Sleepy, and Dopey, right? Each have different personalities. Grumpy wanted to grumble. Happy wanted to smile. Sneezy, well, he just wanted to sneeze. And then Snow White comes to this house, and she's shocked by the state of the space. Cobwebs in the corners, shoes in the cooking pot, dishes in the sink. So she ends up saying, I'm going to clean this place from top to bottom, and maybe then they'll let me stay. And of course, the deer, the birds, the chipmunks pitch in to help. Wouldn't that be nice? And then when the men came back, they were shocked by how clean it was, and they did let her stay in this space. She actually kind of became the boss of this entire house, all of these men. In some ways, she became the owner of this new house, and that's kind of what I want to talk about today. She became the custodian. And a custodian is someone who stewards a space. Snow White came in, saw the state of the space, and decided to do what she could to steward it well. Today, we are beginning a brand new series called Social by Design, because our relationships shouldn't be left to default. Now, when I think about social by design, our space, think of your bedroom. What's the original design of your bedroom? Everyone can say it out loud. Sleep. Everyone's like, what do I say? It's sleep. But oftentimes, our bedroom, just like the house of the seven men, could get misaligned from its original intentions. You want to sleep, but maybe you have tax documents on the bed. Should I remind you guys? Oh, triggering. Maybe you have clothes on the floor, the TV blaring, and you're wondering, this is meant for sleep, and yet it's misaligned from its original intention. And the same thing can happen with our relationships. Did you know that the designer, literally from the beginning of the world, from the first story that we see, which is in Genesis, it actually says that our relationships are meant to be loving. So the original design of your relationships with your family, with your wife, with your husband, with your boyfriend, with your girlfriend, with your friend, it's actually meant to be loving relationships. That's the original design. But if you're anything like me, maybe the social space got a little bit misaligned over the years. Maybe you have a broken family. Maybe you have tired friendships. Maybe you even have a couple toxic relationships. And all of a sudden, our social space that was supposed to be designed for loving relationships is now filled with things that we don't really want to be in the room. Today, I want to be talking about what does it look like to realign our social space to its original intention. I want to talk about today what it looks like to be a custodian. Everyone say custodian. A custodian is someone who stewards a space, someone who owns a space, says, I can control the outcome of this. Now, as we begin, no, I'm not talking necessarily about abusive relationships or ones that we can't actually control. I'm talking about the parts that we can. So if you're looking for loving relationships, over the next 10, 15 minutes, I want to talk about the one role that I think is needed before everything else, which is the role of a custodian. Down below, you'll see notes, fill-ins, and we'll be talking about the 3 practices of a custodian in order to realign our social space to its original intention, which is loving relationships. Here's the question I want to be answering. How does stepping in to the role of custodian create loving relationships? My hope is by the end of this talk, we'll be a little bit more like Snow White when it comes to our connections. As we begin, we are going to sit in this Bible story called Nehemiah. Nehemiah was a man who was the cupbearer to the king. Now, he was Jewish, and the Jewish people were exiled. So they're not in their home, and then over the decades, they start slowly trickling back into their space, into their home, in their social space. But this man named Nehemiah was not there. He was actually serving as the hand to the Persian government, to the king at the time. But he regularly thought about his homeland. How many of you moved here from your homeland, moved to San Diego? So a lot of us. Right? You think about your homeland. I think about my homeland. He's thinking about his homeland. I'm wondering, like, at night, if he just lies awake, like, I wonder if I could be part of the rebuilding process of my home. These people who are gone, coming back, trying to rebuild their life. So he just couldn't help it anymore. At some point, he's like, okay, I'm overwhelmed. I want to help. I want to do my part. I want to be like Snow White and be a custodian of this space. That's what I want to do. I don't think he used those terms, but here's what he says. He starts asking hard questions. And I want to read to you the hard answers that he gets. So he asks his friends, like, how is home? And they told me, this is Nehemiah 1, 3 through 4, the exile survivors who are left there in the province are in bad shape. Conditions are appalling. The wall of Jerusalem is still rubble. The city gates are still cinders. And when I heard this, Nehemiah says, I sat down and I wept. I mourned for days, fasting and praying before the God of heaven. Now, I don't think Nehemiah was necessarily weeping over a broken wall, over the rubble of the city. He was weeping over a broken people, his people. And later we found out things were even worse socially. People were selling themselves into slavery, betraying each other, just treating each other in the worst possible ways, tearing itself apart. And the first thing that Nehemiah does is a practice called inventory. You can actually write this down. This is the first thing that he does. He takes inventory. This is what a custodian does. They identify what's in the space. They take inventory, which means to identify what's in the space. A great custodian identifies what's around them, right? You can't clean up a room if you don't know the original design of the room. And what he's trying to do is, okay, are there clothes on the floor? Are there tax documents on the bed? Is the TV blaring? He's just wondering about the state of his people, about the state of his social space. And he was willing to ask the difficult questions. What if you asked the difficult questions in your social life? What would you uncover? What would you find? Maybe you find brokenness. Maybe you find guilt, shame. You know, I once had a friend who shared my values and my principles, and things didn't really end well with us. I want to get to that in a second. But Nehemiah was able to ask the hard questions. If you took an honest look, your marriage, your kids, your friendships, your coworkers, your family, maybe you don't want to look too closely because you might find some hard truths like Nehemiah did. But unless we're willing to be courageous enough to take inventory of the state of our relationships, we can't make any changes after that. So we've learned so far that Nehemiah wants to go back to his homeland. This is his desire. He begins asking his people hard questions, and they answer, giving difficult answers of the rubble that is his social space, misaligned from the original intention of loving relationships. But as he goes on, I mean, he's really broken up about this to the point in where he prays and he fasts to God. And this is his prayer. This is Nehemiah 1, 6 through 9. He says, pay attention, God, to the prayer of your servant that I'm praying day and night. I'm intercessing for your people, the people of Israel, confessing the sins. And I'm including myself, me and my ancestors, among those who have sinned against you. Honestly, we've treated you like dirt. We haven't done what you told us. We haven't followed your commands. We haven't respected the decisions that you gave Moses to your servants. And this is where we kind of find the second practice of a custodian. Nehemiah takes responsibility. That's the second practice. He takes responsibility of his part to play in the brokenness of his community. You know, if we admit that we're part of the problem, then we get the opportunity to be part of the solution. That's what it looks like to take responsibility. Like I said, I had a friend, we shared the same humor, the same values, and I felt like it was overnight. I then was hearing this friend, through another friend, tell rumors about me that seemed to be untrue, accusations, questioning my character, or being blindsided, hurt, angry, confused. I don't know if you've ever had that experience where someone blindsides you in a negative way in a relationship that matters. But I remember asking, was it my fault? Was I just the scapegoat? Were their claims true? Maybe you've asked the question, why didn't I see this coming? This was a betrayal like the deepest sense. And I still can feel like the tightness in my chest of what I experienced over those couple hours that were just made it hard to breathe when I first heard of this betrayal. And Kaylee and I, my wife and I, we went walking on a lake, around a lake, not on the lake. That would be awesome. But we are not Jesus, who walked on the lake. And as we're walking around this lake, I remember, you know, it didn't seem groundbreaking at the time, but looking back as I'm like writing the story, like Kaylee doesn't even know this, but like she was like, hey, you can't control what this person said, but you can control how you respond. And I remember like, okay, it was a key moment. And then at some point during that day, I remember that night just thinking like, I don't want to respond out of anxiety, because that's how I respond, out of anxiety when something goes. Like, I want to be intentional. I want to actually respond by design and not by default, which is our relationship series that we're in right now. So I decided I'm going to respond by taking responsibility of what I can control. So I started asking the hard questions like Nehemiah. Was it my fault? Asking mentors if they saw the same thing in me. That was extremely difficult. Asking my close friends who also knew this person, do I have a part to play? And at the time, they didn't see the same things that this person saw, which was good. But that taught me what a great custodian does, which takes responsibility of what they can control. You know, when it comes to situations in our relationships that really have a negative impact on us, it's kind of like a stimulus, right? Like something that happens. Maybe someone yells at you, someone spreads a rumor about you, or maybe it's even more simple. Your husband didn't wash the dishes when you asked him to. Your kids didn't take out the trash. That's stimulus, right? That's something that happens, but we actually can control our response. This is the beautiful thing. There's a space between stimulus and response. And I know this is a little like, oh, should we be talking about this? But there is a space between stimulus and response where we could take responsibility of, do I want to react? And how do you react if you're not doing it by design and by default? For me, it's anxiety, talking really fast, being very frustrated. My wife can attest. For you, is it anger? For you, is it yelling? For you, is it to withdraw back into yourself and not mention anything? For you, is it to run away? Is it to freeze? What's your first response when a negative stimulus begins in your relationship? But the beautiful thing that my wife taught me and that we see in Nehemiah is that when he hears these terrible things, your relationships are in rubble, The first thing he does is he goes to God to control the space between stimulus and response. That's the first thing he does. Is he runs to God and says, what can I control? What is my part to play in this? And he takes responsibility. So you can write this down. This is the second way that we can become custodians of our social relationships. You want loving relationships? That's what I want. We take responsibility, which means, you can write this down, we recognize what's yours to own. We recognize what's yours to own. Okay, this is good. Look, we're like 2/3 done. It's happening so fast. So we've learned so far that Nehemiah took inventory. This is the first thing that we do. What's the state of our space? If you find rubble, welcome to the club. This is what Nehemiah found. Broken relationships, fractured friendships. And then he decided, I actually can control how I respond to the stimulus. I'm going to take responsibility of what I can control. Not what others can control, but what I can control. But then there's this third piece that's, I think, one of the most fascinating parts of this that maybe, I don't know if you would expect it. I didn't expect it when I read this story. But Nehemiah doesn't just sit in the brokenness. He takes responsibility, and then, he brainstorms. What can I do, right? He's using ChatGPT, doing a couple classes of yoga just to try to clear his mind. But he just can't get it out of his head. Like, well, I don't know what I want to do. And he's just weighed down by the decision. Have you ever been weighed down by a decision? I heard someone say that tasks are hard, but it's a decision that makes you really exhausted. He's weighed down. What do I do? And then he goes to the king. Like, the worst thing happens at this point. He goes to his, the boss of the boss of the boss, the Persian king at the time. And the king notices that he's just weighed down by this decision. So the king asks him, like, hey, what's happening? Like, where are you at, bro? Like, I don't understand. And the king ends up asking him a question that we're going to really land on today. What do you want? Word for word, what do you want? Anyone watch The Notebook? There's this scene where the main character, Ryan Gosling, is just pouring over the love of his life, and the rain is pouring, and they're in the middle of the road, and Ryan Gosling says, what do you want? What do you want? The Persian king asks Nehemiah. And this is his response. Praying under my breath to the God of heaven, I said, if it pleases the king, if the king thinks well of me, send me to Judah, to the city where my family is buried, so there I can rebuild it. That's a vision, to rebuild the city. He looked at his social space, fractured, broken, misaligned, messy, and he wanted a vision to clear the clutter, to make room for loving relationships. A vision is a compass. It's the North Star. It's the anchor in our lives that allows us to see when times get tough and when the stimulus is crazy, this is how I'm going to respond because this is where I'm going in my life. Here's a vision to rebuild the city. What is your vision for your social life? Maybe you're in business. And you know the amount of meetings. What's your vision statement for the company? We want to grow by 10x by 2030. Right, 2020, when we want to have a 2020 vision. Everyone had a vision for their life, businesses. And yet, the most important thing of our lives, our relationships, we don't have a vision for it. Where do you want your relationships to go? How do you want your relationships to feel? How do you want to respond in your relationships? So, this is the third practice of a custodian. A custodian has the practice of vision. You can write this down. They imagine what it could become. Do you long for your marriage to feel brand new again? For your kids to grow up wanting to be your friends? For your own friends to actually give you life and not death every time that you spend time with them? Here's a little bit of my vision for my social life. My wife feels every day like she's my highest priority. I show care and love through thoughtful words, meaningful experiences, intentional gestures. My closest people know me deeply. They share my joys, my pain, my laughter. My calendar reflects my commitment to my people above my work. Those closest to me respect me the most. And their lives are better because of our connection. And that's a piece of my vision for my social space. What's your vision to rebuild the city as Nehemiah's? That's mine. In 3 years from now, what do you want your relationships to look like? Next week, we're going to learn a lot about Nehemiah and the death threats and the crazy feedback and resistance that he gets. You'll have to come back next week for that. And we learn a little bit more of what he does in his social space. Super Sunday, tailgating, all this stuff. It'll be great. But I think we finished, right? All three of them? Wow. Let's give ourselves a round of applause. I want to invite the band to come back up. They have a lot longer ways to go than at Queen Bee's as they come up. There you have it. A custodian lays the groundwork. Like Snow White goes into this forest home, cobwebs in the corners, shoes in the pots, and she says, I'm gonna rebuild this. Nehemiah rebuilds and desires for this, and he decides to be a custodian. He does three things. He takes inventory, responsibility, and he has a vision for his social space. And here's the exciting part. God has granted you permission and stewardship over your relationships. And the last chapter hasn't been written. Your relationships aren't over. What if? Everyone say, what if? Now say it super curiously. What if? What if your marriage could be restored? What if there could be reconciliation in your friendships? What if your family dynamics don't have to stay the same? What if this was true? The worst possible thing happened to Nehemiah, right? He's way down, and then the king asks him that question. What do you want? What do you want? But then that turned into the best situation. The king said, knock. Kaleah said, knock. And the king says, I'm going to open the door. Here's what Nehemiah, the Persian king, which is shocking and surprising. This is what the king did. He says, I'm going to allow you to go to the place of rubble, to where your family is buried. And I'm not going to give you just permission, but I'm going to give you the wind on your back through my resources. I'm going to send you with help. That's what the king did. And, I think so many of us are looking at our relationships, and God's like, what do you want? Like, what do you want? It's so weird because literally this morning at 5 a.m. as I'm prepping the rest, just finishing the finishing touches, I write in, knock and you shall receive. Kaleah says the same thing on stage. We didn't even talk about it. Literally, God's saying, knock. What do you want? Do you want that relationship to be restored? Do you want that area that feels so fractured and it'll never be better to actually somehow be better? Like, what do you want? And what if God is just waiting for you to knock so he could just open the door? And he doesn't just want to open the door, but he wants to send you with resources and the power of his Holy Spirit to truly be a custodian and to have loving relationships. This is what the Creator intended. This is the original design of your social space. And let's knock and receive, like Nehemiah knocked and received the blessing of the King. So here's what I want to do. Can I have everyone stand up with me? Our God is in the business of making the impossible possible. He's the miracle worker. He's the great physician. And I think sometimes it's scary to ask because, I don't know, what if he doesn't respond in the way that we want? What if he's going to get annoyed by how I say it? What if it's too big of a prayer, too bold? I want to invite the prayer team to come up here. But God says, ask and the mountain will be moved. He says, knock and the door will be open. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean our relationships will be perfect tomorrow, but it does mean this, that God's presence, his presence will be with you. He will send you with help along your journey of aligning your social space with loving relationships. And there's been this practice in this Christian tradition that we follow, that we're here today to be a part of. For thousands of years, Christians who have broken, shattered, fractured, rubbled relationships come to the feet of Jesus and they get anointed by oil, just a cross on your forehead. And this signifies, this represents, this is a microcosm of God's presence being with you in your journey towards loving relationships. Millions have gone before us, and we're going to sing a song called The Blessing. And this song says, I want to bless you from generation to generation. And God wants you to hear that he just wants you to knock so he can give you his blessing today. So we're in this month of February. We're talking about relationships by design because they were never meant to be by default. They were never meant to be by default. So today we're taking a stand. We're standing into our social space and saying, it can change. And I'm going to be a custodian. And I'm going to do that today. It starts today. And I'm wondering, by the end of this series, which, by the way, our group curriculum is all about this, giving you the practical tools, all these things. By the end of this fall, this February, I think we will see healed relationships. I do. I'm going to stand and say, God, that's what I want. I'm knocking. Would you knock today? What do you want? What blessing do you want from God? It's going to be scary just for 5 seconds, but you'll come up here and receive a blessing that will be with you for the whole month of February as you begin this social by design. New life. So let me pray. God, I know that you want to bless me, but I just resist it sometimes. And I'm sorry that I'm too hard on myself. I'm sorry I don't talk to you as much as I feel like I probably should, especially these questions of what I know you want for me and what I want for me. So God, would you as we go before the King right now, as we go before you, thank you. I'm not even going to ask for it because I know you've already received. Thank you for giving us your blessing, your presence. But I do pray right now for the prayers in this room that we don't want to say out loud, the marriage on the brink of divorce. I'm praying for it, God. Would you heal it? The relationship that could never be healed, would you do your work? God, take our offering of relationships, our messy social space, and would you realign it to your original intention of loving relationships? And would you do it now? Would you give us your clarity? Would you give us your presence? Would you give us a specific person during this moment, Lord? Give us what we need for the next 5 minutes as we receive your blessing, your anointing as your people. Amen. So as we sing the song, come up whenever, come to the King, ask. Our people are trained and prepped to give you a blessing, the blessing of God's presence in a real, visceral way today.